Hello and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and this is part 4, chapter 5. Let's begin. When, on the following morning, at 11 o'clock precisely, Raskolnikov entered the building of the district police station, found his way up to the criminal investigation department, and requested that Porfiry Petrovich be informed of his arrival, he was rather surprised that it took so long for anyone to attend to him. At least 10 minutes went by before his name was called. Somehow he had imagined that they would all fall upon him instantly. Meanwhile, however, he stood in the waiting room, and people came and went, seeming not to take the slightest interest in him. In the next room, which resembled an office, a few scribes sat copying documents, and it was obvious that none of them had the slightest notion of who Raskolnikov might be. With a restless and suspicious gaze, he looked round him to see if there might not be some guard, some secret eye being kept on him to see that he did not go away. But there was nothing of that sort. All he could see were office workers going about their petty concerns, and a few other people of some description or other, and none of them could have cared less where he went. More and more resolutely the conviction formed in him that if that enigmatic man, that apparition who had yesterday materialized from nowhere, really had known and seen everything, then it was unlikely that he, Raskolnikov, would now be allowed to stand here like this, quietly waiting. It seemed unlikely, too, that they would have waited till 11 o'clock for him to roll up and tender his greetings. It could mean only one of two things. Either that man had not yet made any statement to the police, or the plain fact was that he, too, knew nothing, and had actually not seen anything with his own eyes. As indeed, how could he have? And that consequently all that had happened to him, Raskolnikov, the day before, had been an apparition, exaggerated by his own sick and overstimulated imagination. This hunch had even begun to dawn on him the day before, at the time of his most intense anxiety and despair. Having weighed all this over, as he prepared for fresh combat, he suddenly felt himself trembling, and a sense of positive indignation seethed up in him at the thought that he was trembling with fear of the hatred of Porfiry Petrovich. The most horrible prospect he could think of was to encounter that man again. He hated him beyond all measure, beyond all bounds, to the point where he was actually afraid of somehow giving himself away behind his hatred. So intense was that indignation that his trembling stopped at once. He prepared to enter with an air of cold insolence, and make a vow to himself to say as little as possible, to keep his eyes and ears open, and on this occasion at least, concentrate the utmost effort on keeping his morbidly overstimulated temperament in check. Porfiry Petrovich turned out to be alone in his chambers just at that moment. His chambers were a room neither large nor small. It contained a large writing desk, with an oilcloth-covered sofa in front of it, a secretaire, a bookcase in one corner, and a few chairs. Government furniture, all of it, made of yellow polished wood. In the corner of the rear wall was a closed door, or partition, rather. There must, it appeared, be other rooms beyond this one. When Raskolnikov came in, Porfiry immediately closed the door by which he had made his entrance, and they were alone together. He greeted his visitor with an apparently cordial and welcoming air, and it was only after several minutes had passed that Raskolnikov observed him in what seemed to be signs of embarrassment, as though he had suddenly been caught off guard, or discovered doing something very secret and private. "Ah, good sir, so here you are, in our neck of the woods," Porfiry began, stretching out both arms to him. "Well, sit down, my dear fellow. But perhaps you don't like to be called good sir, and my dear fellow. As it were, tout court. Please don't think I'm being over-familiar, will you? Yes, right here, on the sofa." Raskolnikov sat down, not taking his eyes off him. Porfiry's phrase, "in our neck of the woods," his apologies in unduly familiar language, his use of the French expression tout court, and so on, All of this told him a great deal. I noticed he stretched both arms out to me, but didn't let me shake his hand, withdrew it in time. Flashed through his brain with suspicion. Both men were eyeing each other warily, but no sooner did their eyes meet than they would avert them with the swiftness of lightning. I've brought you that application. About the watch. Look, here it is. Have I written it correctly, or will I need to copy it out again? What? Oh, that letter. Yes, yes. Have no fear, that will do perfectly. Porfiry Petrovich said, as though he were in some kind of haste, and having said it, took the letter of application and read it through. Yes, this will do perfectly, sir. No more than that is required, he said in the same rapid voice, and put the letter on his desk. Later, after a minute or two, by which time he was talking about something else, he picked it up again and transferred it to his secretary. I think you said yesterday that you wanted to ask me some formal questions about how well I knew the woman who was murdered. Raskolnikov began again. Oh, why did I say I think? Flashed through his head like lightning. And why am I so worried about having said it? Flashed through it like lightning a split second later. And he suddenly had a feeling that his over-anxiety he had, from the merest contact with Porfiry, from the very first words they had uttered, from their very first sight of each other, in one instant, grown to monstrous proportions. And that this was extremely dangerous. His nerves were on edge. His agitation was increasing. This is bad. Bad. I'm going to say the wrong thing again. Yes. Now please don't let me put you at any bother. Everything's perfectly all right. With all the time in the world, sir. All the time in the world. Porfiry Petrovich muttered, wandering to and fro in the region of his desk, but seemingly without any aim, lurching now towards the window, now towards the secretaire, then back towards the desk again. At one moment avoiding Raskolnikov's suspicious gaze, at the next suddenly coming to a halt and looking straight at him, steadily. He made a thoroughly strange spectacle, his small, rather fat and rotund figure for all the world like a little ball rolling off in various directions, and instantly bouncing back from the room's walls and corners. There's no hurry, sir, no hurry at all. I say, do you smoke? Got some of your own? Here, sir, have some of mine, he continued, offering his visitor a cigarette. I'm seeing you in here, but you know, my quarters are just through that partition there. They're provided for me by the government, but I'm living in privately owned accommodation just now, temporarily. They had to do some sort of repairs through there. They're nearly finished now. You know, if you ask me, government quarters are a famous thing, eh? What do you think? Yes, they are, Raskolnikov answered, looking at him almost mockingly. A famous thing, Porfiry Petrovich said, as though he had suddenly thought of something quite different. Yes, a famous thing, he almost shouted at last, suddenly hurling his gaze at Raskolnikov and coming to a standstill only 2 paces from him. This somewhat insane pronouncement, many times repeated, that government quarters were a famous thing, was, in its trite vulgarity, too much at odds with the serious, calculating and enigmatic look he was now fixing on his visitor. All this, however, merely set Raskolnikov's rage boiling even more fiercely, and by now he was quite unable to restrain himself from issuing a mocking and somewhat incautious challenge. I know what I want to ask you, he said suddenly, looking at Porfiry with near insolence, and almost taking pleasure in it. Why, there exists, I believe, a certain legal maxim, a kind of legal technique, if you like, which is used by all state investigators. It consists in starting the inquiry from some remote point, from some trivial matter, or even from a serious one, as long as it's wholly irrelevant, in order, as it were, to give the person being questioned a certain confidence, or rather, to make him feel at his ease, to allay his jumpiness, and then suddenly hit him bang on the head in a thoroughly unexpected way, with the most fatal and dangerous question. Is that so? I've heard that this technique is mentioned all over the textbooks and manuals to this very day. Indeed. So you think that's why I began talking to you about government quarters, do you? Eh? And having said this, Porfiry Petrovich narrowed his eyes to slits and gave a wink. A look of cheerful cunning fleeted across his face. The wrinkles on his forehead were smoothed out, His eyes contracted, his features descended, and he suddenly dissolved in a bout of prolonged, nervous laughter, rocking and swaying all over and looking Raskolnikov straight in the eye. Raskolnikov started to laugh too, though it cost him a certain effort. But when Porfiry, observing that he too was laughing, went off into such peals of laughter that he almost turned purple, Raskolnikov's disgust suddenly got the better of all caution. He stopped laughing, frowned, and looked Porfiry long and loathingly, never once taking his eyes off him throughout the whole entire duration of his extended, and, it seemed, intentionally unceasing bout of mirth. A lack of caution was, however, observable on both sides. The effect of Porfiry Petrovich's outburst was to make it look as though he were laughing in the face of his visitor, who was viewing the whole business with loathing, and as though, moreover, he was very little put out by this circumstance. This latter insight told Raskolnikov a very great deal. He now saw that Porfiry Petrovich had probably not been at all embarrassed at their previous meeting, but that, on the contrary, it was he, Raskolnikov, who had in all likelihood fallen into a trap, that there was something going on here of which he had no knowledge, something with a special purpose, that it had all quite possibly been set up beforehand, and in a moment would make its presence felt and come crushing down on top of him. He came straight to the matter at hand, got to his feet, and picked up his cap. "Porfiry Petrovich," he began resolutely, but rather too irritably. "Yesterday you expressed the wish that I should come and see you, in order that you might put certain questions to me." He placed special emphasis on the word questions. "I have come as you requested, and if there is anything you would like to ask me, please do so. Otherwise, you must forgive me if I leave. I don't have much time. There is a matter I must see to. I have to attend the funeral of that civil servant who was run down in the street, about whom you also know," he added, immediately kicking himself for having added this, and then growing even more irritable. "I'm sick of all this, do you hear, sir? And have been so for a long time now. It's partly this that made me ill. In fact, to put it bluntly," he almost shouted, sensing that the reference to his being ill was even more out of place. "To put it bluntly, be so good as either to ask your questions or let me go this instant. And if you're going to question me, then do it in according to the proper form, sir. I shall not cooperate unless you do. And so I shall now say goodbye to you, as there seems to be nothing more for the two of us to discuss together." "Great heavens above! What is all this you're going on about? What would I be doing questioning you for?" Porfiry Petrovich clucked, at once altering his general manner and tone of voice, and ceasing his laughter instantly. "Please don't let me put you to any bother," he fussed, now resuming his lurching walk in all directions, now suddenly trying to make Raskolnikov sit down. "We've all the time in the world, sir, all the time in the world. And all this is nothing but a lot of nonsense. I'm actually very pleased that you've come to see us at last. I view you as my personal guest. And as for that accursed laughter, dear Rodion Romanovich, you'll have to forgive me. It is Rodion Romanovich, isn't it? I mean, Romanovich is your patronymic, I believe. I live on my nerves a lot, you see, sir. And you entertained me greatly with the wittiness of your observation. Sometimes I really begin to wobble like a piece of India rubber. And it goes on for half an hour at a stretch. I laugh easily, you see, sir. Being built the way I am, I'm sometimes afraid I shall have an attack of palsy. Oh, do sit down. What's the matter? Please, dear fellow. Otherwise I shall think you're angry with me." Raskolnikov kept silent. He listened and observed, still frowning wrathfully. He did, in fact, sit down, but kept a hold of his cap. "I will tell you one thing about myself, dear Rodion Romanovich, in explanation of my character, as it were," Porfiry Petrovich went on as he fussed about the room, trying as before, it seemed, to avoid meeting his visitor's eyes. "I'm not married, you know. An unworldly, unfamiliar sort of fellow. And what's more, one who has had his day. One who is set in his customs, sir. Gone to seed, and have you noticed, Rodion Romanovich, that among us, and by that I mean among us here in Russia, and in particular among our St. Petersburg circles. If two intelligent individuals, not necessarily well acquainted, but who, as it were, have a mutual respect for each other, like you and I just now, sir, come together, entire half hours can pass by without either of them being able to find the most trivial subject of conversation. They seize up on each other, sit there in mutual embarrassment. Everyone has a subject of conversation. Ladies, for example, society men, say men of high fashion, they never lack subjects of conversation. C'est de rigueur. And yet, run-of-the-mill fellows, like us, are always embarrassed and stuck for anything to say. The thinking ones, that is. What's the reason for it, dear chap? Whether it's because we have no interest in what goes on in society, or whether it's just that we are terribly anxious not to deceive one another, I don't know. Eh? What do you think? Oh, I say, do put that cap down of yours. Anyone would think you're just about to leave. It really makes me feel uncomfortable just to look at you. As I said, I'm really very pleased you're here. Raskolnikov put his cap down, but continued to say nothing, and went on listening, frowning and serious-faced to Porfiry's empty and inconsistent chatter. What's his game? Does he really think he'll distract my attention with this stupid chatter of his? I can't give you coffee. There aren't the facilities for it here. But why not just sit with a friend for 5 minutes or so, to pass the time? Porfiry babbled on incessantly. And you know, all these judicial responsibilities of mine. And look, my dear fellow, don't take any offense at my walking up and down like this. You'll have to forgive me. I'm really terribly afraid of offending you. But, you see, I simply must have physical exercise. I spend all my time sitting down, and it's such a relief to be able to walk about for 5 or 10 minutes or so. I've got piles, you see. Actually, I'm thinking of taking up gymnastics. I'm told that there's a place where real state councillors, no less, enjoy the use of skipping ropes. There are even privy councillors among them. You see where science is taking us in this century of ours. As regards to these responsibilities of mine here, these questionings, and all the rest of that formal business, why, you yourself were talking about being questioned just now, dear fellow. Well, if you really want to know, dear Rodion Romanovich, these questionings sometimes confuse the questioner more than they do the person being questioned. As you yourself so witfully and correctly observed just now, my dear fellow. Raskolnikov had observed nothing of the kind. One gets mixed up, so mixed up. It's always the same thing over and over again, like someone beating a drum. Oh well, the reforms are in progress now, and at least our official title is to be changed. And as for our questioning techniques, as you so wittily called them, I'm in complete agreement with you, sir. I mean, I'd like to meet a defendant, even the most homespun of muzhiks who didn't know that they start off by showering them with irrelevant questions, to use your happy turn of phrase, and then suddenly hit him bang on the head with the butt of the metal. Bang on the head, to employ your happy expression. Ha ha! So you really thought I began talking about my quarters in order to make you an ironical fellow, aren't you? Oh well, I shan't go on. Yes, actually, you know, one little word leads to another. One thought suggests another. I mean, you were talking about formal methods earlier, in connection with, you know, questioning procedures, sir. But what good are formal methods? You know, in many cases, formal methods are just rubbish. Sometimes one gains more from simply having a friendly chat. Oh, the formal methods will always be with us, sir. You may be assured of that. But what good are they in the last analysis, I ask you? It's pointless trying to tie an investigator's hands with formal methods at every turn. The work of an investigator is, in its own way, one of the liberal arts, as it were. Or something very near it. Porfiry Petrovich stopped for a moment in order to get his breath back. He had been babbling on persistently in a stream of empty and meaningless phrases into which he would suddenly insert a few enigmatic words, only to slip back at once into meaningless verbiage again. He had almost been running about the room, moving his fat little legs ever more swiftly, looking constantly at the floor, his right arm behind his back, while he waved his left arm ceaselessly in the air, performing various gestures which were invariably quite out of keeping with what he was saying. Raskolnikov suddenly noticed that on a couple of occasions, as he raced about the room, it seemed to pause behind the door for a moment, as though he were listening. What's he doing? Waiting for something? Why, you are really absolutely right, sir, Porfiry said, cheerfully resuming his flow of talk and looking at Raskolnikov with extraordinarily bonhomie, making the latter nearly jump out of his skin and prepare himself for the worst. Really absolutely right in poking fun at our legal formalities with such sharp-wittedness. These deep psychological techniques of ours, well, some of them at any rate, are thoroughly ridiculous, sir. Yes. And even possibly futile, sir. Especially when they're hemmed in by formalities. Yes, sir. There I am going on about formalities again. I mean, suppose I think, or suspect rather, that this, that, or the other person who is involved in some case that has been entrusted to me is guilty of having committed a crime. You're studying law, aren't you, Rodion Romanovich? Yes. Or rather, I was. Well then, here's a little example for you. One that you might be able to keep in mind for the future. Oh, please don't think that I dream of trying to teach you anything. Why, not in view of all these articles on crime you've been publishing. No, sir, but let me make so bold as to put before you just one small example, in the form of a case study, as it were. For example, suppose that I consider this, that, or the other person to be guilty of having committed a crime. Well, why, I ask, should I inconvenience the fellow before I need to, even though I've got evidence against him, sir? There are some chaps, of course, whom I have to arrest at once, but, I mean, there are others who are quite different in character, I do assure you, sir. So why shouldn't I let him run around town for a while? No, but I see you don't quite understand, so let me illustrate it for you a little more clearly. If, for example, I were to haul him in too soon, why, in so doing, I might easily be giving him a certain moral support, as it were. That makes you laugh, does it, eh? Nothing could have been further from Raskolnikov's mind than laughter. He sat with his lips clamped together, never once removing his inflamed gaze from Porfiry Petrovich's eyes. And yet, you see, that's the way it is with certain types, because people vary so much. Yet we only have one practical method to apply to them all. You talked just now about evidence. But, well, yes, one may very well have evidence. But, you know, evidence is, for the most part, a matter of conjecture, my dear fellow. And I mean, after all, I'm only an investigator, and therefore as prone to weakness as the next man. And I swear to you, what I want is a case that can be presented with mathematical clarity. I want the kind of evidence that looks as straightforward as 2 times 2. I want it to look like direct and irrefutable proof. And you see, if I haul him in before time, even though I'm convinced that he's the one, well, you see, I may very well be depriving myself of the means of getting him to give the game away even further. Why? Because I'll have given him a definite place in the whole business. I have, as it were, given him a sense of psychological security and put his fears at rest. He'll go cold on me and withdraw into his shell. What he'll have realized is that he's a convict. They say that down there in Sebastopol, just after the Battle of Alma, the people in intelligence were very worried that the enemy was just about to launch an open attack and take the town in one go. But when they saw that the enemy preferred a straightforward siege and was digging in the front line of trenches, it said that those people in intelligence were much relieved and felt their minds had been put at rest. It meant, you see, that the thing would drag on for at least 2 months, because that was how long a straightforward siege would take. I expect you're laughing again. You don't believe me, eh? Well, of course you're right. You're right, sir, you're right. Those are all rather special cases. I agree with you. The one I've just cited is a very special case indeed. But you see, my dear good Rodion Romanovich, what you need to observe in them is this. The general case, the one all our legal rules and formalities are designed for, and the one on the basis of which they're all worked out and written into legal textbooks, simply doesn't exist. For the very good reason that every case, every crime, if you like, as soon as it takes place in reality, turns into a thoroughly special case. I mean, sometimes it's even something that's never happened before. One sometimes encounters the most comical instance of this kind, sir. Say, I leave a certain gentleman completely alone, I don't arrest him, and I don't trouble him. But I make damn sure that every hour and every minute he knows, or at least suspects, that I know everything. The whole seamy story. And that I'm keeping an eye on him night and day, watching him unremittingly. And if he's conscious of the never-ending suspicion and terror in which I'm keeping him, I tell you, sir, he'll go off into a whirl. He'll come running of his own accord, and he may even do something that will look like 2 times 2, and will, as it were, have a mathematical appearance. That's always most gratifying, sir. It may happen in the case of a clod-hopping muzhik, or it may happen in the case of people such as ourselves. Intelligent men of the contemporary world, whose development has taken a certain direction. All the more so because of that. Because, my dear fellow, it's always very important to know the direction a person's development has taken. And what about nerves? Nerves, sir. You've forgotten about them. I mean, all those thin, ill, nervous characters one sees around nowadays. And all that spleen they've got inside them. Well, I tell you, sir, there are times when a fellow like that can be a kind of walking gold mine. And it's no skin off my nose if he goes walking about the town without any handcuffs on. Leave him alone. Let him go gadding around for the time being if he wants to. I mean, I know that he's already on my plate and won't abscond. Where would he abscond to? Abroad? A Pole might run abroad, but he won't. Especially since I've been keeping an eye on him and have taken certain precautions. Will he run into the depths of our fatherland, perhaps? But I mean, there are only mujiks there. Real Russian homespun ones. Why, a man of contemporary education and development would sooner go to jail than live among such foreigners as those mujiks of ours. But that's all nonsense. Mere circumstantial stuff. What? Abscond? That's just a formal term we use. No. The main thing is something else. It's not just that he won't abscond because he has nowhere to run to. He won't abscond psychologically. Ha! How do you like that way of expressing it? A law of nature will prevent him from getting away from me, even though he has somewhere to run to. Have you ever watched a moth near a kindle flame? Well, that's the way he'll be with me. Hovering circles around me like a moth at a lighted candle. He'll lose his taste for freedom. He'll start to think, get tangled in his thoughts, ensnare himself all round as though in some net or other, worry himself to death. And that's not all. He himself will serve me up a nice mathematical formula like 2 times 2, if only I give him enough latitude. And on he'll go, performing a circular orbit around me, narrowing the radius further and further until... pop! He'll fly straight into my mouth, and I'll swallow him whole. Most gratifying, sir. Do you believe me? Raskolnikov made no reply. He sat pale and motionless, staring into Porfiry's face with the same look of tension. That was a lesson, no mistake, he thought, growing cold. This is more than that cat-and-mouse game he was playing yesterday. And he's not just showing off his power for the sake of it either, implying it to me. He's far too clever for that. There's some other motive at work here. But what is it? Oh, go to the devil, brother. You're trying to frighten me and play a cunning dodge. You're just trying to put me off my guard, make me lose my head prematurely, and then bang the lid on me. But you're on the wrong track. You won't get anywhere. But why would he imply all those things to me? Does he think he can play on my nerves? No, brother, you're on the wrong track. You won't get where you want to go, even if you have to set something up in advance. Well, let's see what it is you have set up. And with all his might he held himself in cheek, preparing himself for a terrible and unknown catastrophe. At times he felt like rushing at Porfiry and strangling him right there and then. Even as he had entered this room, he had been afraid of his own violent rage. He could feel that his mouth had dried up. His heart was beating like a hammer. The foam had coagulated on his lips. But all the same, he was determined to keep silent and not say one word prematurely. He realized that this was the best tactic to adopt in the position he was in, because not only would he avoid the risk of saying the wrong thing, he would also irritate his enemy with his silence, and possibly make him say something ill-advised. That, at least, was what he hoped. "But I see that you don't believe me, sir. You think I'm still making harmless jokes at your expense," Porfiry began again, growing more and more affable, keeping up an unceasing chuckle of pleasure and resuming his gyrations around the room. "And of course, you're quite right, sir. Why, even the shape of my body has been ordained by God in such a manner that it suggests only comic thoughts to others. I'm a clown, sir. But let me tell you this, and repeat it again. And that is that you, my dear Rodion Romanovich, forgive me, forgive an old man for saying so, a man still young, a man, as it were, in the prime of his youth. And accordingly, you place a supreme value on the human intellect, as all young people do. You're tempted by the playful sharpness of the intellect, and the abstract arguments of reason, sir. In fact, just like the Austrian Hofkriegsrat in the old days, so far as I'm able to form any judgment on the events of a military nature. On paper, they had defeated Napoleon, and taken him prisoner. And yet, as they were sitting there in their study, working it all out in the most sharp-witted manner, what did General Mack do but go and surrender with his entire army? I can see, dear Rodion Romanovich, that you're laughing at me. Here I am, a civil state employee, picking all my examples from military history. But what am I to do? It's a weakness of mine. I'm fond of military matters, and I'm inordinately fond of reading all those military reports. I suppose I'm in the wrong career, really. I ought to have served in the military, sir. Really, I ought. I might not have become a Napoleon, but I'd have made the rank of major, sir. Well, sir, but let me tell you, my dear fellow, the whole unvarnished truth about what we were discussing, those special cases, that is to say, reality and human nature, my dear sir, are not to be taken lightly. And my God, how they sometimes cut the ground from under the most sagacious estimates. Listen to an old man. I'm serious, Rodion Romanovich. As he said this, the barely 35-year-old Porfiry Petrovich really did appear suddenly to become much older. Even his voice changed, and he seemed to grow hunched and stooped over. What's more, I'm a man who tells things the way they are, sir. Would you agree? What's your opinion? I don't think it can possibly be denied. The things I'm telling you for nothing. Why, I'm not even asking for a bonus. Well, so there we are, sir. Let me continue. Sharp-wittedness is, in my opinion, a wonderful thing, sir. It is, as it were, an embellishment of nature, and a solace in life. But what conjuring tricks can it perform? Why, it can baffle the daylights out of a poor investigator who has a hard enough time trying not to be carried away by his own imagination. Something that invariably happens, for he is only human, sir. Yet it's human nature that gets the poor investigator out of his difficulty, sir, more's the pity. And that's just what these young fellows, who are carried away by their own sharp-wittedness, steeping across all obstacles, as you expressed it with such wit and cunning, don't seem to take into account. We shall assume that he'll lie, this fellow, this special case, sir, this incognito, sir, and that he'll lie brilliantly, in the most cunning manner. One might well imagine that this is his moment of triumph, that now he can enjoy the fruits of his sharp-wittedness. But no. Pop! Right at the most interesting moment, the moment when it's likely to cause the greatest degree of scandal, he falls down in a dead faint. We shall assume that it's caused by his illness, by the airlessness. The rooms can sometimes be very airless. But even so, sir, even so, he's given us an idea. He has lied splendidly, but he's left human nature out of his calculations. There's perfidy for you, sir. On another occasion, getting carried away by the playfulness of his sharp-wittedness, he'll start trying to make a fool of the person who suspects him. He'll turn pale a little too naturally, so that it seems a little too lifelike. And again, he has given us an idea. Even though he hoodwinks the person the first time, the person will think it over during the night if he's got any brains. And that's the way it goes every step of the way, sir. And it won't stop there. Our special case will start trying to run ahead of the game. But in where he's not invited, he'll start talking ceaselessly about things he ought to keep quiet about. He'll start launching into allegories of various kinds. He'll come to the station himself and ask, why are they taking so long to arrest me? And I mean, this sort of thing can happen to the most sharp-witted fellows one can think of. To psychologists and littéraires, sir. Human nature is a mirror, sir. A mirror of the most transparent kind. Look in it and feast your eyes, sir. But why have you gone so pale, Rodion Romanovich? Is the air too roomless for you? Shall I open a window? Oh, please don't bother! Raskolnikov shouted, and suddenly burst into loud laughter. Please don't bother! Porfiry came to a standstill opposite him, waited for a moment, and suddenly burst out laughing himself in his wake. Raskolnikov got up from the sofa, suddenly cutting short his own, by now almost epileptic laughter. Porfiry Petrovich, he said loudly and distinctly, though he could hardly stay upright on his trembling legs. It is clear to me that you definitely suspect me of having murdered that old woman and her sister Lizaveta. For my part, I'll tell you that I grew heartily sick of this a long time ago. If you believe that you have the right to prosecute me, then please do so. If you are going to arrest me, arrest me. But I won't allow you to laugh in my face and torment me like this. Suddenly, his lips began to quiver. His eyes burned with fury. And his voice, which until now had been restrained, began to boom. I won't allow it, sir! He shouted suddenly, bringing his fist down with all his might on the desk. Do you hear, Porfiry Petrovich? I won't allow it! Oh, heavens above! What's this now? Porfiry Petrovich exclaimed, apparently in utter alarm. My dear fellow Rodion Romanovich, old chap, dear benefactor, what's the matter? I won't allow it! Raskolnikov shouted again. My dear fellow, keep your voice down. I mean, they'll hear, they'll come in. Well, what would we tell them? Just think. Porfiry Petrovich whispered in horror, bringing his face right up to Raskolnikov's. I won't allow it. I won't allow it. He repeated mechanically, but now suddenly in a dead whisper. Porfiry Petrovich turned away and ran to open the window. You must let some fresh air in, and you must have a glass of water, my dear man. You've had a fit, sir. And he rushed to the door in order to send for some water. But there happened to be a decanter of water in the corner. My dear fellow, drink this, he whispered, rushing towards him with the decanter. Porfiry Petrovich's alarm and sympathy was so natural that Raskolnikov fell silent and began to study him with wild curiosity. He declined, however, to accept the water. Rodion Romanovich, my dear chap, you know you'll drive yourself crazy if you go on like this. I do assure you. Ah! Dear me. Come on, drink this. Drink just a little of it. He made him take the glass into his hands. Raskolnikov raised it to his lips mechanically, but, remembering where he was, put it down on the table with disgust. Yes, sir, you've had a fit. If you go on like this, you'll bring your old illness back again, Porfiry Petrovich said with friendly sympathy, though with a slightly embarrassed look. Heavens above! I mean, why don't you look after yourself? Why, Dmitri Prokofitch came to see me yesterday. No, I admit, sir, that I've a nasty, sarcastic nature, but the conclusions he drew from it. Heavens above! He came to see me yesterday after you'd been here. We had dinner together. We talked and talked. I simply threw up my hands in bewilderment. Well, I thought, heavens above! Was it you who sent him? Oh, sit down, my dear fellow. In Christ's name, sit down. No, I didn't send him, but I knew he was going to see you, and the reason for his visit. Raskolnikov replied acidly. You knew? Yes. Yes? So what? Simply, Rodion Romanovich, my dear fellow, that's not the only exploit of yours I know about. I know about all of them, sir. I know about your going off to rent new lodgings in another apartment late at night after darkness had fallen. About your ringing the doorbell, asking about the blood, and fairly baffling the workmen and the yard keepers no end. You see, I understand your state of mind. The state of mind you were in that day. But I'll say it again. If you go on like this, you will drive yourself crazy. I mean it, you will, sir. You'll go off in a spin. You've an awful lot of indignation boiling inside you, sir. Righteous indignation at the insult you've received. First from fate, and then from the police. And you've been dashing hither and thither in order, as it were, to make everybody start talking. And so have done with the thing at one go, because you're sick of this stupid nonsense and all these suspicions. That's right, isn't it? I've fathomed your mood, haven't I? Only if you go on like this, it's not just yourself you'll drive off into a spin, but my dear Razumikhin too. And I mean, he's too good for that kind of thing. You know it yourself. You have an illness, and he has virtue, and your illness may be catching for him. My dear fellow, when you've calmed down, I'll explain it to you. But sit down, my dear fellow, for Christ's sake, sit down. Please take a rest, you look dreadful. Sit down. Raskolnikov sat down. His shivering had passed, and a hot fever broke out all over his body. In deep amazement, he listened tensely to the alarmed Porfiry Petrovich, who was tending to him in such a friendly way. He did not, however, believe a single word he was saying, even though he felt a strange inclination to do so. Porfiry's unexpected remark about the apartment had come as a complete shock to him. Does that mean he knows about the apartment? He thought suddenly. He told me about it himself. Yes, sir. We had a case almost identical to this. A psychological one. In the course of our judicial work. A case of illness, sir. Porfiry went on quickly. He also tried to hang a murder on himself, sir. And how he went about it. Came up with a regular hallucination. Provided us with evidence. Described the circumstances. Got everyone well and truly mixed up. And for what reason? He himself, quite without premeditation, had been the cause of a murder. But only in part. And when he discovered that he'd given the murderers their opportunity, he got depressed, went into a kind of trance, began imagining things, went right off the rails, and started telling everyone that he was the murderer. But the Supreme Senate finally got to the bottom of the case, and the wretched fellow was acquitted and sent off to the poorhouse. Thank goodness for the Supreme Senate. Tut, tut, dear, dear, dear. But if you go on like that, what can you expect, dear fellow? If you go on like that, you'll end up with brain fever. And if you follow these impulses to overstimulate your nerves, you'll be off ringing doorbells and asking questions about blood, sir. I mean, I've studied all this psychology stuff in the course of my work. People who go on like that sometimes have an urge to throw themselves out of windows or jump off church towers. And it's a tempting sort of sensation. It's the same with ringing doorbells, sir. It's an illness, Rodion Romanovich. An illness. You're neglecting your health, sir. You ought to consult an experienced medic, not that fat chap of yours. What's wrong with you is delirium. The plain fact is that you're doing everything in a state of delirium. For a moment, everything began to spin violently around Raskolnikov. Can it really be? Flashed through his head. Can it really be that he's lying even now? No, it's impossible. Impossible. He thought, repulsing this idea, feeling even before he had thought it, to what heights of rabid fury and rage it was capable of leading him, feeling that he might even go mad with rage. That wasn't something that happened in a state of delirium. It was real, he shouted, exerting all the powers of his reason in an attempt to fathom what Porfiry's game was. "It was real! It was real! Do you hear?" "Yes, sir, I understand. And I hear, too. You kept saying the same things yesterday. That it had nothing to do with delirium. You were quite adamant about it. I understand everything you can possibly tell me, sir. Dear me. But Rodion Romanovich, my dear young benefactor, please at least take account of this. I mean, for heaven's sake, if you were really guilty or in some way mixed up in that accursed business, would you be so adamant about insisting that you weren't delirious when you did all that, but were, on the contrary, in full possession of your faculties? Would you make that particular point of insisting on it, with your special form of stubbornness? Would you? In my opinion, the answer would have to be no. I mean, if you did have something on your conscience, you'd have insisted that the contrary was true. That you had most certainly been delirious. Isn't that right? It is, isn't it? There was a note of slyness in his question. Raskolnikov shrank back hard against the back of the sofa, away from Porfiry, who was leaning towards him, and studied him in amazement, silently and fixedly. "And what about Mr. Razumikhin? And the question of whether he came to talk to me yesterday of his own accord, or whether it was your own idea? I mean, you'd have been bound to say that he came of his own accord, and concealed the fact that it was your own idea. But you haven't done that. You keep insisting that it was your own idea." Raskolnikov had never insisted anything of the kind. A cold shiver passed down his spine. "You're lying," he said slowly and weakly, his lips contorted in a painful smile. "You're trying to show me again that you know my whole game, that you know all my answers in advance," he said, half aware that he was not weighing his words as he ought to. "You're trying to frighten me. Or else you're just laughing at me." As he said this, he continued to stare fixedly at Porfiry. And suddenly, a limitless and malicious hatred flashed in his eyes. "You're lying!" he shouted. "You yourself know that the best subterfuge for a criminal is to tell the truth as much as possible, and to do all he possibly can not to conceal anything that doesn't matter. I don't believe you." "You're a flighty fellow, aren't you?" Porfiry began to giggle. "There's no bringing you round. Some kind of monomania has taken a hold of you. So you don't believe me? Well, I will tell you that you do believe me. At least a quarter of the way. And that I'm going to see to it that you believe me the other 3/4 of the way. Because I'm genuinely fond of you, and sincerely wish you well." Raskolnikov's lips began to tremble. "Yes, sir. I wish you well. And let me tell you once and for all," he went on, gently, and in a friendly tone of voice, taking hold of Raskolnikov's arm slightly above the elbow. "Let me tell you once and for all. Look after your illness. Particularly since your family is here now. You must keep it in your thoughts. What you ought to be doing is putting them at ease and spoiling them a bit. But all you do is frighten them. What business is it of yours? How do you know that? Why are you so interested? Does this mean that you've been following me around and are trying to demonstrate it to me?" "My dear fellow, fight from you yourself that I learned it all. You don't seem to notice that in your agitation you tell me and others everything. I also learned a great number of interesting details from Mr. Razumikhin, Dmitri Prokofitch, yesterday. Well, sir, but you've interrupted me. What I'm trying to say is that because of your over-anxiousness, for all your sharp-wittedness, you've really lost your ability to see things from a common-sense point of view. I mean, look, for example. Let's go back to what we were talking about. You're ringing the doorbell. A priceless gem of information like that. A piece of evidence. A genuine piece of evidence, sir. And I give it to you with both hands. I, the investigator. Doesn't that tell you anything? I mean, if I'd suspected you the least little bit, do you think I'd have done a thing like that? On the contrary, My job would have been to lull your suspicions, and not let on that I already knew about that fact, that piece of evidence. By doing so, to draw you off in the opposite direction, and then suddenly bring the butt of the metal, to use your own expression, down on your head and say, "What, sir, were you doing in the murdered woman's apartment at 10 o'clock last night? Or was it nearer to 11? And why did you ring the doorbell? Why did you ask about the blood? Why did you try to bluff the yard keepers and make them go down to the local police lieutenant's bureau with you? That's what I'd have done if I'd had the merest grain of suspicion about you. I'd have taken a statement from you with all the formalities. We'd have searched your quarters. And you might even have been arrested. So that means, you see, that I don't suspect you. Otherwise, I'd have behaved differently. But I'll say it again, sir. You've lost your ability to see things from a common sense point of view. And in fact, you can't see anything at all. Raskolnikov made a convulsive jerk with his whole body, so violent that Porfiry Petrovich noted it only too well. "You're lying!" he shouted. "I don't know what your motives are, but you're lying. You weren't talking like this a moment ago, and it's impossible for me to be mistaken. You're lying." "Oh, so that's what you think, is it?" Porfiry said, obviously annoyed, but maintaining the most cheerful and sardonic air, apparently not at all concerned what opinion Mr. Raskolnikov might have of him. "You think I'm lying, do you? After the way I treated you just now, I, a state investigator, supplying you with all the answers and giving you everything you need for your own defense, bringing in all the psychological stuff about it being due from your illness, your delirium, your having taken proper umbrage, to a mixture of melancholy and policemen and the rest of it, eh?" Though, as a matter of fact, I think it only right to point out that all those psychological explanations, those dodges and excuses, really don't fare very well, and are a matter of conjecture. Illness, you say, delirium, fantasies. It was all a hallucination. I don't remember. That's all very fine, sir. But why, my dear fellow, did you hallucinate those particular fantasies when you were sick and delirious, and not some others? I mean, you could have had others, sir, couldn't you? Raskolnikov looked at him with proud contempt. "Let's come to the point," he said, loudly and earnestly, getting up and pushing Porfiry away from him slightly as he did so. "Let's get to the point. What I want to know, once and for all, is, do you consider me free from suspicion or do you not? Come on, Porfiry Petrovich, give me a clear and final answer, and be quick about it. I want to hear it right now." "My goodness, what a job! What a job I'm having with you!" Porfiry exclaimed, looking thoroughly shy and cheerful, and not in the least concerned. "What's the point in your knowing so much when they haven't started bothering you at all yet? Why, you're just like a child who wants to play with matches. And why are you so worried? Why are you thrusting yourself on us like this? For what reason, eh?" "I will say it again!" Raskolnikov shouted in fury. "I can no longer endure!" "What, sir? The uncertainty?" Porfiry said, interrupting. "Stop tormenting me! I won't allow it! I tell you, I won't allow it! I categorically refuse! You hear? You hear?" He shouted again, slamming his fist down on the table. "Keep your voice down. They'll hear, you know. I warn you in all seriousness, watch out for yourself. I'm not joking, sir," Porfiry said in a whisper. But this time his face lacked the expression of feminine good nature and alarm it had worn earlier. Indeed, now he was quite simply giving orders, furrowing his brow, and seeming in one go to sweep away all the mysteries and ambiguities there had been. This only lasted a moment, however. The bewildered Raskolnikov suddenly fell into a condition of genuine frenzy. But it was strange. He again obeyed the command to keep his voice down, even though he was in the most intense paroxysm of fury. "I won't allow you to torment me like this," he suddenly whispered in his earlier tone of voice, with pain and hatred, realizing for a second that he had no option but to obey the command. His fury intensifying even further at this thought. "Arrest me! Search my lodgings! Do as you please! But do it according to the rulebook and stop playing with me, sir. Do not dare to presume. Oh, don't worry about the rulebook, Porfiry said, interrupting with his earlier sly smile, feasting his eyes on Raskolnikov with positive pleasure. My dear fellow, I invited you here today, as it were, to my home, in a completely friendly fashion. I don't want your friendship, and I spit upon it. Do you hear? And look, I'm going to take my cap and leave now. Well, what have you got to say to that? If you're going to arrest me. He snatched up his cap and walked towards the door. But don't you want to see my little surprise? Porfiry giggled, again taking hold of him slightly above the elbow and coming to a halt beside the door. He was manifestly growing more and more cheerful and playful, and this finally drove Raskolnikov out of himself. What little surprise? What are you talking about? He asked, suddenly stopping in his tracks and looking at Porfiry with fright. My little surprise, sir. Look over there. He's sitting on the other side of that door. He pointed to the closed door of the partition which led into his government quarters. I even locked him in so he wouldn't run away. What on earth? Where? What? Raskolnikov went over to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. It's locked, sir. Look, here's the key. And true enough, he showed him the key, taking it out of his pocket. You're still lying! Raskolnikov began to yell, now unable to control himself. You're lying, you damned Mr. Punch! And he hurled himself at Porfiry, who, although he was retreating towards the door, showed not the slightest sign of fear. I understand everything! Everything! Raskolnikov said as he leapt up to him. You're lying and teasing me to make me give myself away! You can't give yourself away any further, Rodion Romanovich, my dear fellow. Why, you're in a positive frenzy. Please stop shouting, sir, or I'll call in my assistants. You're lying! It's all empty air! Go ahead, call them in then! You knew I was ill, and you tried to overtax me to the point of hysteria in order to make me give myself away. That's what your motive was. Well, let's see your evidence. I see it all now. You haven't any evidence. All you've got is trashy, good-for-nothing guesses, the hunches of Mr. Zamyatov. You knew what sort of man I am. You wanted to drive me to frenzy, and then suddenly knock the wind out of me with priests and deputies. It's them you're waiting for, eh? What are you waiting for? Where are they? Let's see them. Oh, what deputies are you talking about, my dear fellow? The things a man will get into his head. The way you're carrying on, we couldn't possibly do the things according to the rulebook, as you call it. The fact is, my dear chap, you haven't the slightest idea of what you're talking about. But the rulebook won't go away, sir. You'll see for yourself. Porfiry muttered, putting his ear to the door. Just then, there was indeed a commotion on the other side of the door in the next room. Ah, they're coming! Raskolnikov shouted. You sent for them! You've been waiting for them! You were expecting them. Well, let them all come in, deputies, witnesses, whoever you like. Let's see them. I'm ready. Ready! But just at that point, a strange incident took place. Something so unlooked for, given the general turn of events, that neither Raskolnikov nor Porfiry Petrovich could possibly have expected such a denouement. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz, and if you really enjoyed, do subscribe, because there is more to come. This is a long book, and I'm not going to stop saying that until we're probably done with it. This is a long book. I'm loving it, though, and I really hope you are too. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review, as it's the easiest way to get this in front of as many people as possible, and reading your reviews really makes my day. If you want to support the show further on Spotify and just support me further, you can just listen to the show while you're sleeping. Just have it play in the background. You don't even need to have the volume on. I don't believe Spotify checks those sorts of things. I don't think they have access to check what volume your phone is turned on or your computer headphones are turned on. But just listen to it while I'm sleeping and help me get the monetization requirements that I need there. That would be really, really great if you could help me out. If you want to support the show in a more personal way, there's a Ko-Fi link, which is now on screen if you're on YouTube, or in the description box on all podcast platforms, and also on YouTube if you just find that easier. Once again, thank you very, very much for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.